And we are live. Welcome to episode 11 of INSYNC Live. My name is Ridwan, and today we have the deepest honor of having Weixiang with us. Weixiang is a jazz musician of the highest order. He's a first call musician in Singapore and has toured with many international mainstream jazz acts, Grammy Award winners, and around the world extensively. He also used to lecture as an adjunct professor at New York University at LASALLE College of the Arts, and is currently the deputy head at Music and Drama Company. And on top of that, an associate music director at Jazz Association Singapore. I hope I got all that right.
I wear many hats.
So normally how I like to begin things is to ask about your personal story, to share with the viewers out there how you came to where you are today.
Oh wow! My story is kind of like twists and turns. I mean, if I had to connect them all, it would be the very simple adage of like, I know what I don't want to do. So basically, I went through the whole school system, ended up in law school in NUS, and during the same time, a friend of mine introduced me to the jazz band. So he was like a trombone player, and he was like saying, I feel kind of like awkward going by myself, so why don't you join me? So we both did. I played valve trombone because I had some background playing brass instruments, right? Yeah, so I went into the big band. We rehearsed for a while, and during that time we did quite a number of performances at Harry's Boat Key.
Ooh.
That was 2001 or 2, something like that. It was like a long time ago when Harry's was like the beacon of jazz, right? At least in Singapore. And so we were doing performances, like big band performances, and it was great because they had a really small stage, but we somehow managed to fit 16 people up on stage, social distancing. Yeah, but it was always a great hang because there's like Lindy Hop dancers, it was always good fun. And there was like this one day where the piano player in the band didn't show up, and the band leader at that time, Rick Smith, he was asking around like, I'm really in a pickle right now. Can somebody volunteer to play piano? So I kind of like raised my hand very sheepishly. I was like, yeah, I can try. So I went out on stage. I went to the piano, and then I realized that there were no scores, there were no charts whatsoever, and I had to play everything by instinct, which was like particularly stressful. Yeah, but I suppose I did okay, So actually from then on, I continued playing piano in the band, and I kind of like ended up paying my way through law school with basically gig money, right? Those were like the good old days of the early 2000s when one could actually still do that, right? So that's what I did. I kind of like transitioned into a professional musician career by happenstance, right? So upon graduation, it was like kind of a no-brainer because I was already working as a professional, right? And it brought me a lot of joy, brought me a lot of basically I surrounded myself with a whole network of jazz friends, musicians, and it kind of made sense to continue doing what I was doing. And few years after that, I kind of like got a bit antsy. I was like thinking, hey, maybe I want to be better at what I'm doing. Yeah, because this kind of like intrinsic in the whole practice of jazz, like, you're always trying to get better at what you're doing. Right, so it came to the point where I was like thinking, hey, me and all my friends, we idolize all these jazz musicians from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and like why don't I try, or why don't we try to get nearer to this art form, right? So actually, a whole bunch of us went eventually did the same thing, but I believe I was like one of the first ones. So what I did was that I applied for a master's. I applied for a master's in music at New York University, right? I got accepted, went to New York. I was helped by a grant from National Arts Council. That was very handy, right? And then that kind of lasted for quite a long time, maybe about 3 years. New York was really, really kind, very, very kind to me. You know, I had so much opportunities to play with so many people. I made so many great friends, musical or otherwise. Yeah, but it came to the point of time where I had to come back. So I came back. I was then invited to be the music director for a jazz club here, Jazz at Southbridge, run by my friend Eddie Chan. Yeah, Eddie Chan is also a topic by himself, but yeah, basically I was a music director there for a few years, right? During which I started doing my adjunct work at LaSalle College of the Arts, right? And I realized that, hey, I actually kind of like doing this, you know. So when the the opening came up for a full-time lecturer, I jumped at the opportunity, right? So that kind of like carried me for a few years, maybe 7 years. So that will put us at about last year, right? So last year, another opportunity came up where I could basically do the job that I do right now, which is being the deputy head of music and drama company, right? So I took that chance, in a heartbeat, because it's pretty much the natural evolution of an artistic career. In the sense that right now I'm gaining a lot of competencies by the management of personnel, or creative personnel, right? Which is I find a skill set that requires development, requires experience, right? Because it's not just about like pushing paper or pushing people around doing different projects, but it's more about human management, right? How to get the best results of different creative types, you know. It's always a challenge, right? So that kind of like keeps me busy. At the same time, I'm also the associate music director for Jazz Association in Singapore, right? And this association is we have a whole great team, right? Essentially running this charity, right? Which is formed to further the adoption of jazz into essentially popular culture in Singapore. It's helmed by the executive director, Professor Jeremy Montero, right? So maybe about a few years ago, he asked me to join him, right, in this little quest, right? Amongst other things, my role in this is to develop the youth interest, right? Be it youth listenership, audienceship, all the way to youth musicians being part of the whole jazz experience, right? So this is like pretty much my third year in there. I think we have done pretty well. We just concluded our latest Lion City Youth Jazz Festival, right? Which is actually quite interesting because it pairs youth musicians, right, with some of the best jazz musicians around the planet,
Mm.
right? And they play together. Albeit like right now it's kind of like a virtual setting, but over the years it's been continuing to grow and grow, right? And we are beginning to see the results of that right now. We've seen some young musicians rise to essentially like world-class standard, which I think is like something that we can be very proud of.
It's beautiful because you're closing distance for them.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you traveled before to close the distance, now you're kind of achieving that through
Yeah.
this means.
Yeah. And also, I mean, jazz is one of those art forms that has a very, very long runway of apprenticeship. It's entirely possible to stay. I mean, someone like an apprentice for decades. If you don't meet the right people, if you don't have the right artistic frame of mind, it's entirely possible not to reach like a level that can qualify you as say a high level professional. And we're trying to shorten this runway by pairing people of very high caliber with our youth, right? And hopefully this will kind of like springboard them to a higher level.
Fulfill whatever potential they may have had in the first place, right? A question for you is, I guess it's two questions. The first one is because from studying for a law degree, getting a master's, and then now you're influencing generations of musicians through education and platform creation and playing jazz at the highest level as well. How do these things interact for you? How have they interacted, and right now, how are they interacting for you?
How do they interact? That's a very difficult question. I mean, I'll be lying if I say that they are very separate things because, everything is pretty much connected. But I think if you had to view it, say, aesthetically, academia or even law with performance, with jazz and music in general, it's kind of like all related in a sense that like it's about crunching very complicated big topics. The layman idea of what jazz is like it's so difficult. Same thing with law. It's like, hey, he's a lawyer, well, achievement, that kind of thing. Yeah, but the ability to reduce all that into very simple chunks and being able to assimilate these simple building blocks, right, into usable elements, I think it's a very core similarity, right, that is apparent in all these art forms. I just call law an art form. But it's true, and I think with anything, with any skill, with any art, with any skill in general, one has to start from the fundamentals, right? And the understanding of the basic building blocks leads to a greater understanding of more complex combinations, variations, so on and so forth, right? And one big thing that I learned actually quite recently, right, is that it's okay to say that you don't understand, right? And it's okay to tell people that you don't understand. There is no shame in saying that you don't understand, right? And it's better to clarify foundational questions than to assume that you know that.
It's a lovely viewpoint of modular thinking almost. So you can troubleshoot also. As you build and stack all these blocks in different permutations, you can go back and forth. Very, very interesting. One question I have for you is, I think everyone will ask you this kind of question, which is, what is it like to be a jazz musician in Singapore? But I think that question can be from the perspective of creativity and performance aesthetic as a jazz musician growing up in Singapore. And then the other facet is naturally that financial pathways that you have as a jazz musician in Singapore. So feel free to answer.
Yeah, let me tackle the easy question, which is basically the financial pathway. Man, I can think of, maybe a handful of musicians, that I know personally, right, who have been financially affluent from, from jazz, right? It's never easy. But at the same time, there are, I know of other art forms which are even worse. That doesn't really quite, inspire anybody to take that on. But at the same time, I think one saving point is that the whole study of jazz, right, especially in music, allows you to be essentially a musical chimera, right? You can reinvent yourself in very, very different ways, You can be a session musician one day, right? You can be an orchestrator the next day, right? You can be a teacher the next day, right? You can be a rock star the next day, entirely within the job scope, within a skill set. Yeah. That's like one thing that really attracts me to jazz, the whole like plasticity of the art form. It can move and meld according to the situation. Yeah. Sorry, what's the first question?
So the first one is more from the perspective of, in terms of being a jazz musician, trying to be in this scene in Singapore creatively and from an aesthetic point of view. How is it like? The people around you, the scene around you, how has that changed also?
How has that changed? It's funny because like the jazz scene in Singapore has a very, very long history. Nobody's really quite seriously tracked it yet, but I would suspect that it's over maybe 100 years old by now. The jazz scene in Singapore. But that being said, the past maybe 40 or so odd years, we've been pretty much influenced by a group of immigrants from US, from America, who came in by a few channels, but they stayed, right? And quite a number of generations of musicians were very influenced by the way these musicians played jazz, and that in turn influences what we listen to, right? And I think to some extent it also influences what we aspire to become as well. So to speak in more specific terms, we are more inclined towards like the East Coast side of things, right? With jazz, meaning to us, New York is the mecca of jazz, right? And actually, yeah, that's basically it. The funny thing is that like with the jazz scene in Singapore it's always been pretty much like a work situation, right? Meaning that like that's a healthy amount of work, right? So as a result, most of what we play, most of what we know are informed by what we do for a living, which is basically like play gigs, events, weddings, whatnot, right? So we are actually quite tapped into the Great American Songbook, right? Basically jazz standards, right? I think most jazz students around the world, they had to refer to like a tiny little book on their phones when they play standards, but not for musicians from Singapore. We tend to memorize the whole thing.
The whole thing.
Yeah, and that's like pretty much a function of like how we learn music, right? It was like always a social, go out, hang out at jazz clubs kind of situation. I don't think it has like changed much. Even right now with like our jazz degree program at LaSalle, right? There's still like a healthy respect for tradition and history, yeah, and that kind of like in turn influences right the aesthetic element of that as well, yeah. For good or for bad, the jazz scene in Singapore is like pretty much middle of the road.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we tend to mine standard forms and things like that.
I see. Because I can kind of segue into one question I have. So your thoughts on maybe what is flourishing to you right now in this industry, and what could use some care and attention?
Sorry, again.
So what is flourishing in this industry, and what could use some care and attention?
What could use some care and attention? What is flourishing right now? I think that's like a new generation of musicians, right? Who are operating at really, really high levels. I've never seen that happen, at least in my professional life. So I take a lot of heart from that. I was like, hey, I think we're doing something right. And yeah, of course, like, with along with other somewhat like serious art forms, we tend to have a niche audience, right? I'm hoping that more people could assess our music, right? Yeah. There's a whole bunch of like misconceptions with the whole idea of jazz being, snooty, being too serious, or I don't understand what's going on. Which of course is valid to some extent, but at the same time, I think it's okay to give it a try. As a listener, right? There are things that you will like, and there are things that you won't like. That's completely fine, But I think it would be nice if one could get past the misconceptions, right, and the assumptions about the cerebral nature of jazz.
Because I find like if I bring friends to a live jazz performance who don't listen to jazz, then they understand the conversational nature of it, the energies of the space, and how the musicians are listening to and giving, where there's no mistakes really. You just listen and you take, and then now you give. You take and you give. And then they start really loving it. I don't really understand the cerebral proliferation of like, this is how you understand jazz.
Right.
So I'm not really sure why that has happened. And in your perspective, how would you educate an audience around this? Like, do you create a platform for audience education? Do you talk about it? Because I do think it's important to help them frame the participation as a listener. With my work with the Jazz Association, we do quite a lot of outreach. So education takes like quite a few, types, right? Well, there's like a few types of education. So number one would be like reaching out to new audiences, like audiences who ordinarily would not listen to jazz, like say, for example, young kids, or actually next month we are doing a collaboration with Singapore Chinese Cultural Center. We are basically adapting Chinese songs, arranging them to fit the whole jazz over, right? Yes.
Then of course, like there's the slightly more technical side of things. Jeremy Montero does like a class on like jazz improvisation for classical musicians,
I
right?
see.
Which is like a great bridge.
Oh,
right?
that's
Because-
wonderful.
yeah, exactly. So there are quite a number of efforts, right, that attempt to bridge, trying to make the whole journey to the listening of jazz a little bit more, or the like less daunting. Yeah, kind of like, just wish that more people would listen to music. And it's not the case where you have to understand everything, right? Just the same way, like, if you go to an art gallery, right, you don't have to understand every single facet of this thing. It's like either you like it or not, or even if you don't like it, with I have with a lot of artworks from my own personal experience, right? I could still basically appreciate different technical elements, right? Or some aesthetic elements of like of a particular piece, which like in general I don't like, but like, hey, check out that hue of black or something, I think it's important, especially with more involved art forms. I think to feel, right, to peer past what's going on and to ask why is going on, right, and that would then illuminate the next step of your journey in the appreciation of the art form, right? Recently I kind of like got into coffee. Because my wife bought me an espresso machine.
Okay.
So I was like, let me go and just make a cup of coffee. And I was like, that's quite terrible.
Have you been buying beans and?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I am deep into it. What beans are you currently like really digging?
Well, there's this one bag that my brother bought me. Well, as a result of getting an espresso machine, everybody has been buying me bags. So that's kind of a good thing.
That's a good
So
thing.
well, there's like a local roaster.
Yeah. Nylon?
Round boy roasters.
Round boy, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So the story was like, hey, I was like a bit disappointed. Well, first of all, at the espresso machines, like, hey, come on, man, like you can do better. And then secondly, I was like disappointed with myself, like, hey, I don't think I really quite understand what's going on, right? Right.
I see.
So then I did a little bit more research. I kind of like dug my own rabbit hole, and then I think I make somewhat decent coffee now.
Yeah, it's beautiful because he's taking a system of understanding that you have applied to other things. Then now, okay, I should apply the coffee also to really appreciate beauty.
Right.
I really love what you said just now. So, on that note, right, per episode we have a featured musical guest. So today's musical guest is Brielle Kaga. She's a singer-songwriter, and she's about to perform her single entitled California. I hope you enjoy her track. Take it away, Jinx.
Feel the rays, the ocean breeze. Never thought I'd be in so deep. Hear the waves crashing the shore. I'll never be lonely. Friday nights to play a drive. This sweet guy who drinks it all. When I lost the gaucho ball, my cheeks sunsets. Try to capture shapes and silhouettes. Free birds in ivy and night. I'll never be lonely. Santa Barbara, please be mine. I choose you anytime. California, missing you, but dreaming about you. California, golden skies and paradise. California, wishing you, been thinking about me. California, Cali, Cali, California. There I found my favorite pizza place. Hung out with my friends till late. Should've gone for that coffee date. Could've turned out pretty great. Some things I really should've said. All these memories I won't forget. Where the sun is always shining in California. California, missing you, but dreaming about you.